So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, you know, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, you know, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com. Our book today is Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan J. Robinson. This is from the introduction. In the last few years, U.S. politics has become completely upended. The presidency of Donald Trump, which took politicians and commentators by total surprise, shattered a number of Washington orthodoxies. Very few experts thought that a vicious, loutish reality TV star was capable of rising to the nation's highest office. But they had misjudged political reality and forgot the cardinal rule: anything can happen. Trump's improbable rise to power was not the only political irregularity to occur over the last several years. While Trump was defeating the most powerful figures in the country's two major political parties, another unexpected phenomena was occurring: the rise of a new radicalism on the left. When Bernie Sanders began his campaign for the 2016 presidential nomination, nobody expected him to pose a serious challenge to Hillary Clinton. Clinton was the consensus choice of the party establishment, and influential Democrats openly said it was her turn. Sanders was in the race as a protest candidate. Not only was he considered a marginal figure in Washington, lacking both connections and funding, but he did not have any of the characteristics that traditionally made one electable. He was from a tiny state known for hippies and cheese. He was old. He was not particularly photogenic, polished, or popular. And he was an avowed socialist in a country that had had a half-century Cold War between good American capitalism and evil Soviet socialism. It was not, however, a year in which the traditional criteria of electability would have mattered especially much. Sanders, perhaps as much to his own surprise as anyone else's, quickly attracted a significant following. His radical message, stingingly critical of the existing Democratic Party, resonated strongly with progressives who felt let down by Obama and viewed Clinton as part of an uninspiring and possibly corrupt political dynasty. When the first primary contest came around, February's 2016 Iowa caucuses, Sanders achieved a shockingly strong result, coming close to beating Clinton outright. As Sanders began to fill stadiums with crowds, attracting a highly visible and well-organized following, it quickly became clear that the race would not be the coronation that Clinton had anticipated. Clinton ultimately won the Democratic nomination, but it took a bruising fight. Sanders was no mere protest candidate. He was a serious competitor who won 23 contests to Clinton's 34. While Clinton received over 16 million votes across the various primaries, Sanders achieved a remarkable 13 million. It was surprising enough that a socialist candidate could be anything more than a gadfly in a major party nominating contest. It was downright stunning that such a candidate could rack up nearly 24 primary victories against one of the most experienced and well-connected members of the Democratic Party. Sanders' unexpected rise to prominence represented an extraordinary shift in the political landscape. The nearest precedent was Eugene Debs' 1920 presidential run on the Socialist Party ticket. Debs achieved nearly 1 million votes despite being in prison for defying the World War I draft. But even Debs didn't pose a serious electoral threat to the dominant parties, receiving only 3% of the general election vote. Sanders, who once recorded a spoken-word Eugene Debs tribute album and kept a portrait of Debs in his office while mayor of Burlington, Vermont, achieved a far greater measure of success. He may not have started the political revolution that he often spoke of, but he came relatively close to poaching the presidential nomination from the party elite's pre-selected candidate. The Sanders campaign was fueled by millennials whose dissatisfaction with mainstream Democrats made them highly responsive to Sanders' progressive message. Clinton may have had more support than Sanders overall, but young people of all races and genders preferred Sanders over Clinton by large margins. With the exception of Lena Dunham, it was hard to find many people under 30 who had much enthusiasm for Clinton, a candidate they associated with Wall Street cronyism and the Iraq disaster. Sanders' success with millennials, while unanticipated by pollsters, did not occur purely because of Sanders' political skill. It happened because a revolt had been brewing among young progressives for years, as they had steadily grown more and more alienated from the Democratic Party mainstream. Ever since the Occupy Wall Street movement in 2011, young people in the United States have become increasingly radicalized, weighted down with debt, paying through the nose for health insurance, unable to afford to have kids, and frustrated by an undemocratic political system that implements the policy preferences of rich elites. Millennials were both frustrated and tired. Sanders came along at just the right moment. They had been waiting for someone to say what was on their minds, that the economic and political systems were unfair at their core and needed a drastic overhaul. But the Sanders campaign was just the start. Joe Crowley had been in Congress for 20 years and was one of the highest-ranking members of the House Democrats. He was considered a serious contender for the party leadership and known in his New York district as a well-connected part of the local Democratic machine. He was the sort of backroom deal-making congressman whose influence is disproportionate to his name recognition. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was not an important figure in the Democratic Party, far from it. She was a 28-year-old bartender and activist who had once interned for Ted Kennedy and had worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign. A member of the Democratic Socialists of America, DSA, she was considered the longest of long shots in her primary contest against Crowley. Crowley had endorsements from powerful political organizations like the AFL-CIO, the Human Rights Campaign, and Planned Parenthood. And it goes on from there. Why You Should Be a Socialist by Nathan Robinson. Area, more or less, and her website is Jayapal, jayapal.house.gov, and you can tweet her at Rep Jayapal. Representative Jayapal, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Tom. It's always good to be with you.
Thank you. And Sean, just a heads up, I just got a text from Nate that the TriCaster crashed. I don't know if you need to do anything about that. Representative Jayapal, you've been, I know this morning you were on the phone with the Senate leadership, Democratic Senate leadership. I'm curious your thoughts on, A, where we're at, how we're doing, how the nation is going forward. B, this new stimulus package, Donald Trump wants a couple $100 billion that apparently is specifically to pass out to big banks. And I know that the Democrats have an alternative plan. You want to tell us about these things?
Yeah, so just in terms of where the nation is, this is, we're being hit incredibly hard all over the country. Of course, Washington State was first, and in some ways I think we have done a better job than many, many other parts of the country because we implemented restrictions on staying home early. But you see the devastation in New York and, in the South, and the death toll is continuing to rise. So this is tough. On top of that, the latest unemployment numbers that just came out, another 6.6 million unemployment claims. That's on top of 10 million in the last 2 weeks. So we're now at about 16.5 million unemployment claims, which is enormous. I mean, that devastation is enormous. So we in Congress have passed 3 packages now, relief packages. It's disaster relief. That's what it is. And it totals about $3.5 trillion, which may sound like a lot, but honestly, Tom, it's not. It's not compared to the scale of the crisis. I think that economists are projecting that we're going to see depression-level unemployment, and that's something that we have not seen in this country. Unless you're extremely on in your years, we don't have very many people who have lived through that. So this is a new world, and it is not going to be turning on a switch and being able to go back to work, even when we get through the surge capacity, the surge times, because about 50 to 90% of people, depending on how lucky or unlucky or good we are at following the restrictions, will stay uninfected. And that means that as long as you have a big uninfected population, you are at risk for a second and even a third wave of infection. So we're going to have a widespread program of testing and contact tracing and public health protocols and investments in public health systems across the country if we ever want to try to get people back to work. So our packages have focused on getting relief, but that relief is taking too long. We've done some very good things. The best thing, in my opinion, has been the dramatic expansion of the unemployment insurance system, unemployment benefits. We extended the time period. We added an additional $600 at the federal level so that you would get to about 100% of payroll for most workers. But the unemployment systems are not designed to deal with so many claims. And disinvestment by the federal government has meant that people have been cutting back on the staff that process these claims. The computer systems are old, and there are a lot of people going into the unemployment system who have never had to go into the unemployment system. The other thing we did in the package is we put $350 billion into forgivable loans for small businesses, which is theoretically a good idea, and they're forgivable if you hire back your payroll, which is what we want to do. We want to keep people on payroll. We want to prevent layoffs and keep paychecks going in. But the problem is that we're using big banks to get that money out. The theory behind that was the distribution is better than trying to have a choke point at the SBA. But now these big banks are holding us hostage and saying, well, unless you release all the restrictions, we don't want to participate. Or they're just not able to process these loans quickly. So the help is not getting to people. And we have people in Washington State anyway who have been without a paycheck for at least a month because the layoffs started earlier here. And when you have half of the population not even having $400 in their bank account for an emergency, this is devastating. So we have to do a lot more, and we have to be very bold. And my proposal that I'm rolling out today is a guaranteed federal paycheck program. So we would guarantee paychecks for businesses of all sizes, and there would be serious conditions attached to that, sort of like what we did in the airline part of the last package we passed. No stock buybacks, limits on executive pay, no union busting, all those things, a worker on the board. But we would actually guarantee paychecks because it will be a quicker way to get money out, and it will keep people from having to go on unemployment and prevent these mass layoffs that we're going to continue to see otherwise. Similar to what has happened in Denmark and some other places.
Yeah. I should add, by the way, that you're with us for the hour taking calls from our listeners, and our telephone number is 202-808-9925. So if you have a question for Congresswoman Jayapal or Representative Jayapal, feel free to give us a shout. Representative Jayapal, I this morning caught a story on Business Insider. The headline is, Spain is moving to establish permanent basic income in the wake of the coronavirus epidemic. Nadia Calvino, their Minister for Economic Affairs, their equivalent of the Treasury Secretary, said that this is part of a barrage of policies. And she said that the government, quote, hopes it would become a permanent instrument. We're going to do it as soon as possible so it can be useful, not just for this extraordinary situation, and that it remains forever. It's a quote from her. The country's social security minister, I guess he's sort of like HHS or something, I'm not sure, said that this measure would represent, quote, a permanent safety net for the most vulnerable. Now, it has not yet passed Spain's parliament, but this is what the government wants to do. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I think that, what we are seeing is how desperately we need these long-term solutions, and how whatever we put in place now does need to become, we need to think about many of these things as becoming permanent solutions. And so I think that this is something that we're going to have to deal with around healthcare. We have, as you know, I've been the lead sponsor of Medicare for All, and there are ways right now that we have a proposal to expand Medicare for everybody who's unemployed, and then to expand Medicaid for everybody who is uninsured and near the poverty line, because the idea that we would not be able to have not only free testing and free treatment for the virus, which we should have, but also that we need to have a system that can deal with the health consequences of this virus, which, by the way, are substantial. So I think that this is really, really important for us to think short term, but also in the long term, what survives.
Great. And we've got calls from all over the country for you, so we will pick those up in just a moment. Representative Pramila Jayapal is with us. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. She represents the 7th District of the state of Washington, the Seattle area generally, and in the U.S. House of Representatives. Jayapal, Jayapal.house.gov.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And you can tweet her at Rep Jayapal. We'll be right back with your calls for Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal. And welcome back. Paul, watching us on Free Speech TV in Lucerne, California. Paul, you are on the air with Representative Jayapal.
First of all, I could thank you for being an awesome representative. And
thank
I'd like
you.
to talk about, you're welcome. The Green New Deal, everybody's talking about it. Well, with the stay-at-home order and all the businesses shutting down, I read an article 3 days ago that 10 million premature asthma deaths have been prevented. Seems like a big deal to me, and that's all because of the stay-at-home order and businesses not operating and not polluting the air. Well, if that's true, we're going to end up saving lives in the long run because of this epidemic, because of the 10 million premature asthma deaths that were stopped. So this is a peek into what a green future would look like for us. Look, the dolphins are back in the canals. People are not dying of asthma just in a short time. Just from the
So let's get Representative Jayapal's response to this, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah, no, Paul, I had to go somewhere the other day, of course, physical distancing and everything in place. But I noticed that our Seattle skyline was crystal clear. And, all of the pollution and other things that we typically see, not there. We're hearing the same thing about fish and our wildlife. And so I do think that we are seeing the effects of reducing emissions right now. But I would just say that the other side of the story you're telling is that 70% of fatalities in Chicago are African Americans, 81% of fatalities in Milwaukee County, African Americans. Many low-income people, the research shows that low-income folks have about 2 times the rate of fatalities as others because of the chronic health conditions that have existed. Not all of that is going to go away because people are staying home or because emissions are down. So we really have this situation where delayed care in this country, lack of universal health care, has meant that, as well as people living near toxic waste dumps or highways and breathing in that emissions, getting asthma, all those chronic health conditions are far more prevalent in low-income people, folks of color, and those are the people that are actually getting the virus and then dying from it. And so, it's I think you're right that we're seeing what happens even just in a short period of time when we reduce emissions. But there is another side to this, which is that a lot of these fatalities and a lot of the consequences of this, even for people who get it, have been hospitalized and then recover, are going to be terrible. They are showing now that many younger people under 50 have gotten the virus, have been hospitalized, and that there are long-term consequences for lung damage and other things for people who get it. So kind of, two pieces to this. You're right, and we got a lot to worry about still.
Yeah. But if we were to make the transition to really good public transportation infrastructure and electric vehicles, we would see clear skies and less traffic on the roads, just like now.
Exactly.
Yeah. Step by step. Representative Jayapal is with us for the hour, taking your calls. She's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, represents the 7th District of the state of Washington in the U.S. House of Representatives, and we'll be back with more of your calls for her after this. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Hey, we just put up a new video for supporters of our program. You can find it over at thomhartmann.com, talking about the relationship between Fox News, Rupert Murdoch, and basically the whole right-wing hate agenda on Hispanics, by and large, saying that Hispanics are changing our culture. Really? This is European culture. I mean, the Mayans and Aztecs got replaced by the Spaniards, remember? They're mostly Catholic. I don't see the cultural difference here, but Fox sure does. And also pointing out that Kevin Rudd, the former Prime Minister of Australia, calls out Rupert Murdoch and says, he's quote, a cancer on Australian democracy. Well, apparently a cancer on American democracy as well. So you can check out this new video over at thomhartmann.com. It's just available to people who are members of, supporters of our program. Welcome back. Representative Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. And Dave in Federal Way, Washington, you're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Yeah, hey, Representative Jayapal. I live in King County. I live in Federal Way. And I'm in this situation where I believe, this is just my opinion, that the company that I worked for, they sent me home without pay, okay? And they put a disciplinary report in my record without me even knowing it. And they basically said I had COVID-19, which I do not. I was screened and I didn't have enough symptoms to, progress to the higher level of screening. Now, I believe this is a reprisal for something that happened earlier, right? And I called an attorney on it, and an employment attorney, and she told me that there are a lot of cases like this, like mine, that sound similar to mine, but they're referring them to the governor's office because there is no so I guess my question is, are you aware that there is no standards for this sort of thing yet?
That's a great question. I am not aware of standards for it, and it seems to me that would be, the Attorney General potentially could, if there were a series of those cases, could take some of those cases up. Good idea to go to the governor's office. And I will also mention this to my folks at the governor's office and see if we can highlight this issue. I can see employers, bad employers, low-road employers using this as an opportunity to try to get rid of employees they don't like, which is essentially, I think, what you're saying. So I do think we need to figure out how to have some protections in there so that that doesn't happen. I know there's also some companies that are using this as an opportunity for union busting, right? To fire the folks that have been leaders and trying to organize a union, or argue for better benefits. So thanks for raising it. I'll take it up and see what I can find out.
Michael in Bronx, New York. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hello, Representative Jayapal. Great to speak with you. As an African American, I'm being empathetic with Chinese Americans. And at least here in New York, there have been an increase of racial attacks towards the Chinese Americans, and a lot of which due to Mr. Trump's tweets and rhetoric, falsely calling this a Chinese Kung Fu virus. Even FBI reports state that there's been an increase of hate crimes towards Chinese Americans. I can attest that there have been physical attacks towards these innocent people, and even resulting in casualties due to the severity of the attacks. That even in Chinatown, Manhattan, there's been a heavy presence of police officers. And as a result, all the Chinese restaurants here in New York have closed down. I found out that 99%, if maybe 100%.
Michael,
now,
forgive my interrupting, but we have less than a minute left, so I'm gonna ask the Congresswoman to respond to your great rant.
Thanks, Michael.
Whatever you want, But go ahead, Congresswoman.
No, thanks, Michael. I mean, I think that this is a huge issue for the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Grace Meng in New York and Judy Chu in California and I have been really leading a charge to fight back against this. We've written letters to the president. We've issued statements. We have been very clear that this cannot continue. This is, in fact, there was new research showing that the virus was probably brought to New York from Europe. But this is not a time to think about where this virus is originating. Everybody has it. It's a pandemic. And it does not do any good. And in fact, it's incredibly harmful. People have died. Asian Americans across the country have died actually because of hate violence related to this. So you are right to be disturbed by it. I thank you for that. And this is something that every single one of us should be speaking out against. The racism that is coming out from these stereotypes and the incorrect information that the president continues to put out there when he calls it a Kung Fu virus or Chinese virus or any of those things. It's just outrageous, and we got to speak out against it.
Yeah. Congresswoman, I misread my time cue. I still have 45 seconds. Do you expect that there's any way to successfully push back on Trump's use of racism and xenophobia to promote his political agenda in the context of this thing?
I think it's very, very difficult. You may have seen an article today that he is using the virus to essentially do what he's been trying to do for a long time and shut off asylum on the southern border. We have been working very hard on the immigration front, and you may have seen that actually we sent a letter, I think it was a week ago, to DHS about getting these detainees out of the immigration detention facilities because there are outbreaks there. And ICE just announced 2 days ago that it's going to start that process. We have a whole bill around what that looks like to use alternatives and get folks out into safety.
That's great.
And, really attack that in a big way.
That's great. Hang on just a second.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We have a 5-minute break here at the bottom of the hour. On the other side of that break, we will be back with Representative Jayapal taking your calls for the rest of the hour. Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. And this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state, free market doctrine has for decades been directing large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition. How to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire, 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative, and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best we are told, governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly trying to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Judt called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one, necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Cherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back to the Thom Hartmann Program. We have a national town hall meeting here this hour with Representative Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing the 7th District of the state of Washington. And Dan in Denver, Colorado, you are on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Yeah, hi, thank you. I would like to ask, will the Democrats stand firm and say there will be no additional bills passed until a national mail-in ballot election bill has passed? And it must also include a very easy and liberally applied online and or phone-in registration requirement. Otherwise, we will see the largest and farthest-reaching voter suppression in history. And this needs to be a separate standalone bill, so it can't be watered down, and so the Republicans will be forced to fight against the basic right to vote.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Dan, that this has got to be a top priority, especially after the mess we saw in Wisconsin. And you know that Trump and the Republicans have doubled down on fighting a transition to vote by mail. I come from Washington State. You in Colorado, you have a great vote by mail system as well. And you know, we were actually in the midst of the pandemic just hitting us in Washington State when our primary election happened, and we had the largest record voter turnout, actually. And so we were able to get the election done in spite of everything that was going on around us. So it is a priority for us to do two things. One, make sure that every state, all the 2020 federal elections are protected and move to vote by mail with the option for in-person voting for those who can't get to vote by mail, which there are some people for various reasons that can't vote by mail. And then also to put an additional $3.6 billion into states being able to do what they need to do to transition their systems. That has been a priority of ours. We were not able to get it in the last bill, and I know that they are that this is something that we're pushing very hard. I think the challenge with saying we're not going to pass any bill unless we get this is, you see the devastation around us. But I think we are getting to that point on some of these things that Republicans are refusing to do that are going to really affect our democracy and our public health. Frankly, absurd that Wisconsin is, having people go out to the polls to vote in the midst of a stay-home pandemic. So we're on it.
Yeah, and let me add, for people who are not familiar with Washington State, you said that you were able to do your primary just as the pandemic was hitting Washington State, and that's because Washington State, like Oregon and Utah and Hawaii, is all mail-in voting. And
exactly.
So therefore, nobody had to show up.
Exactly, and so ballots had already gone out. Nobody had to show up. We're also used to it, right? But this is the first time we've done a vote by mail, an actual primary election. We used to have the caucus system, and so we were a little bit worried that moving from a caucus to a primary would be challenging. But again, the vote by mail made all of that good.
Yeah, just super easy. Phil in Brookings, South Dakota, you're on the air with Representative Jayapal. Phil? Okay, Phil is listening to his radio. You've got to listen to the telephone, guys. There's a slight delay. Bruce in Columbus, Ohio. Bruce, you're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Well, thank you for being here. My question is, Trump has fired the National Intelligence Inspector General and the Stimulus Economic Recovery Inspector General. I assume he's going to leave those positions open so he can't be policed. What can you do to make sure those positions are filled and not filled by a Trump lackey? Thank you very much. I'll listen off the air.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So one thing, we are trying to look into language that we could put into the bill that would prohibit Trump from using a signing statement, which is what he used last time, to just say, I'm not going to listen to the provisions that are in the bill. It's a little bit harder on the Inspector General because those are positions that typically the administration hires. So can we make it subject to authorization of Congress? What are the different approaches we can take to this? Because this guy just has no compunctions about doing anything that he wants. And he doesn't believe, we already know from having impeached him, that he does not believe in checks and balances or balance of powers at all. So this is, and a crisis is sort of the best time for him to move a lot of these things because everybody is focused on so many different pieces that have to happen in a crisis. One positive thing I would say is that I noticed that the polling is now starting to once again reflect that people know that he's not doing a good job in leading on this pandemic, and it's having disastrous consequences and fatalities because of it. So I do think people are starting to see that, but this is, we're looking at what provisions we can insert that he can't turn around with a signing statement, which is what he did last time.
Hal in Houston, Texas. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hello, Tom. This is Hi here. Sorry. Representative Jayapal, I have just kind of curiosity again here, but that's okay. But when we emerge from this crisis, and of course Congress will conduct hearings to investigate, do you think that from the results of these hearings, that the recommendations to either the current administration or the next administration is to reorganize, I guess, various, I would call it, health response agencies, including the CDC for themselves also. I guess the reason why I'm asking this question here is, just from gathering all the news about the craziness of the supply shortages of these PEPs, is that there was no coordination or no leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two things that you're pointing to. One is the president, the guy who's sitting in the White House, or the woman in the future who's sitting in the White House, are they using the powers of the federal government to coordinate, to respond, to listen to science, and to utilize the agencies that are there in a good way? I would say the answer under this president is no. The second is, and that's why, he said he's invoked the Defense Production Act, but his idea of doing that is, some guy that he knows who's on the board of a big company calls up and says, hey, I can get you 10,000 masks. Well, that's not what we're talking about when we say invoke the Defense Production Act. We're talking about using it to compel domestic manufacture of those critical goods that we need, whether it's tests, swabs, gowns, masks, all of those things. And it means that some companies that had not been manufacturing those things would actually begin to retool their production lines to manufacture those things. That is very different than just saying, hey, is there some company out there who can give us a few things? That's not a coordinated response. The second piece you're pointing to is the investment in actual science-based research and competent people at these different agencies. And we have cut down his budgets, and Republicans over the years, as well as Democrats, I will say, have invested in austerity politics. And it means that the IRS has many fewer staff, employment security has many fewer staff, state governments have been decimated, many in the South really decimated. And so you have a whole series of government agencies that don't have the staff that they need and have been, sort of pillaged for people who actually believe in science and respond to research. And some of those people have been replaced with people who just have political agendas. So there's really two pieces here. And then I would add a third, which is that our systems are patchworked. They are not set up to deal with a crisis like this. I'll give you an example of healthcare. We have a very patchwork, bad, for-profit healthcare system that does not allow us to coordinate our government response quickly, to make sure that we're not getting price gouged, to make sure that, vaccine development actually is supported by the federal government, and then the results of that are shared with everybody and not just used for profits for the biggest CEOs of those drug companies. And we can't actually make sure that we're investing in hospital beds and, capacity that we need versus administration costs of the current for-profit system. So on many levels, we need different systems that will support and engender equity and equality, income, gender, racial justice, all of those things, but across the board give people more opportunity to be healthy and economically secure, which then allows them to weather better a crisis like this.
Do you think, we just have 15 seconds, do you think any of this is, before the break, do you think any of this is going to pass the Senate with Mitch McConnell there?
Well, I do think that there's a lot of pressure, and I'll just give you an example with the federal paycheck guarantee. There's interest from Republicans on that. And so the challenge is going to be to put in the conditions that we want, right? This isn't just free money for businesses. They need to have some conditions that they abide by. That's going to be the challenge.
There you go. Representative Jayapal is doing a national town hall meeting here on our program today. We'll be taking your calls for Representative Jayapal and more of them in just a moment. She is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And represents the 7th District of Washington State. We'll be back with more of your calls for Representative Jayapal in just a moment. And welcome back. Mark in Salem, Oregon. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hello. Given the discussion, it seems as though really massive testing is one of the fastest ways to understand the spread of this thing, especially among the asymptomatic. And so my question is, I haven't heard anything about a massive increase in acquiring these tests, and what's more expensive, massive testing or a total economic collapse?
Well, you've asked a rhetorical question. There's no question that testing is what we should be doing, and that's where the federal government, again, has failed us on any kind of coordination and compelling of production using the Defense Production Act to compel the manufacture of things like swabs. I mean, when we say testing, what that involves is the components of a test kit, right? And the things that we're running out of right now are primarily swabs. So I know our University of Washington just ordered 80,000 swabs from China, tested the swabs, found them to be good. They now have another order on, and they believe they can get a couple million swabs. We should not be dependent on China for the production of swabs. We can do that right here in the United States. Same thing with reagents. There are tests going on right now to see. We have a study here at the UW that is also funded by the Gates folks that we could develop they have developed a home-based testing kit. And the benefit of that is that instead of those swabs that are called nasolaryngeo swabs that go down up your nose and then down your throat, quite painful. You can't do that yourself. You need somebody else to do that for you. These swabs just go into the nose, and then you can self-swab. You can put it in a little test tube and that's got a medium in it, and you can send it back, and it can be analyzed, and you can have results within a day or 2 days, depending on how long it takes to get the test back to the lab. And so that would be a very important investment in getting community spread results. So figuring out how far has this thing spread. You're not just testing the most vulnerable or the people that have symptoms. We know that this is an asymptomatic disease, that you can have no symptoms and you can still be transmitting. It's why staying home is so important. But we have no real sense of what the percentage of the disease is in the community. And if we want to send people back to work, we are going to have widespread testing and then what's called contact tracing. What that means is if you get the virus and we discover that you have it, we have to then, public health officials have to be able to trace back every contact that you, the person who has the virus, has had over the last 7 days, so that, or the time that you've been infected, so that we can then immediately isolate not only you, but also isolate those other people that have gotten the virus. And so that means that that's going to have to be a cycling process. You're going to have to be testing people regularly, not just once, but regularly if they're going to work, making sure that if they're in contact with people, that you're isolating those people. So 150% we got to invest in widespread testing, contact tracing, and we're not going to be able to get back to work and get the economy going without doing that.
We have calls from Minnesota, Iowa, Michigan, Ohio, Illinois, California. We'll get to as many of them as we can right after this. Representative Pramila Jayapal is taking your calls here on the Thom Hartmann Program.
Did you know that Ronald Reagan committed treason to become president in 1980 and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America.
Hey, we have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program, and it's about the state representative, Timothy Gintner in Ohio, who has proposed legislation. It actually passed the House of Representatives in Ohio, HB 164. It's now going to the Senate, where there are 33 senators, 9 of them Democrats. This legislation, if you were to ask a student, say you're a science teacher, and you were to ask a student the question like, does the sun rotate around the Earth? Is the Earth the center of the universe? And the student said yes. You would have to grade the answer as correct, because the student might belong to some cult that believes that the Earth is at the center of the universe. Seriously. Religion trumps science in the classroom. It is getting so weird out there. Anyhow, you can check out all the details of it in our little video over at thomhartmann.com. And thanks again for supporting the program. Well, welcome back, Representative Pramila Jayapal, taking your calls for the hour. And Roberta in Maple Grove, Minnesota, you're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Okay, I just wanted to know if it's true that the post office is not being given any support throughout this, even though, of course, they've been hit with this too. And being as how if we want to go to by mail voting, we really, really need them. Is there anything in the stuff that you're putting forth to protect them and so that we'll have them if we're able to get the voting switched to in-mail voting?
Yes, super important question. They were left out. We did try to get that in there, and we were not able to do that, but we are still trying. We're also, this is the reality is that the Postal Service is running out of cash, just like the transit agencies. And so we did take care of the transit agencies, giving them operating money, which federal dollars are not usually able to be used for operating for transit. But we built that into the package thanks to DeFazio, chairman of the Transportation Committee, one of the founders, by the way, of the Congressional Progressive Caucus way back in 1991, great ally for progressive issues. The Trump has said he basically, postal workers don't deserve a financial lifeline. It's absurd. And then he blames Amazon and others, and he claims that the postal office's woes are self-inflicted when that is just not the case. And so he actually personally intervened to strip the democratically proposed postal rescue program from the last bill that we passed, the $2.2 trillion bill. And so, he's been lying for years, actually, and saying that the Postal Service is losing money because it's contracting with Amazon and other private corporations. And actually, that's just not true. They actually saw an increase in revenue from some of those contracts. And many companies are now using the Postal Service to do their delivery. So this is just a really important, we're going to have to try one more time to keep these things in. And I think across the board, Democrats are just going to have to play more hardball, to be honest.
Stephen in Pataskala, Ohio, if I'm saying that right. You're on the air with Representative Jayapal.
Pataskala in Licking County.
Okay,
it means
thank you.
Licking, actually, supposedly, or that's one interpretation.
Okay.
Anyway, why are we on a war footing with Venezuela, with U.S. warships and gunboats approaching and threatening on provenly fake drug charges against the Maduro administration? How is Venezuela our business besides our oil interest, per se?
Yeah, well, I and Mark Pocan, my Progressive Caucus co-chair, we were amongst the group of people who said that the United States' role should not be to participate in overthrows, but that we should actually be trying to help ensure that the people of Venezuela get to pick their next leader. And so this has been, controversial in some places because it's not like nobody's endorsing Maduro, but I think it is really important to remember that dictators that the United States has overthrown, but then sought to impose our will on the people with other leaders, those leaders have sometimes turned out to be worse dictators. So we should just make sure that we are doing what we can to intervene and get other international agencies and international coalition, international organizations and nations to be a part of that solution. So I don't think it's that we have no role to play in Venezuela, but I think that we have to be very careful about what role we play.
Representative Jayapal, we just have 45 seconds left. I see that Jonathan in Seattle wanted advice. He's an independent contractor on getting unemployment out of the CARES Act. Do you have some thoughts on that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely, Jonathan. So we set up a new program within the unemployment division that should cover gig workers and other independent contractors. And so if you're having trouble with that, just call my office. And I should have that number on hand, but I don't. But you can just look it up online and call my Seattle office, and we'll walk you through how to do that.
That is great. Representative Jayapal, we really appreciate you dropping by and doing these national town hall meetings with us. We're going to hit the break here in about 10 seconds, but I wanted to thank you so much. You're doing such great work in Congress, fighting for all of us.
You bet. Thanks, Tom, and thanks so much for having me on. I always enjoy it, and your callers are always asking great questions.
There you go. Well, the door is always open. Representative Pramila Jayapal, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Thanks again, Representative Jayapal.
Thank you. Take care.
You're welcome. We'll be right back. We're going to get into, a lot of the news of the day. How is this affecting you? We've got actually a great guest, too, Richard Wolff.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
We say fight!
So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Today's book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Impeachment, A Citizen's Guide by Cass R. Sunstein. This is from Chapter 1, titled Majesty and Mystery. It's an old story, and it's probably even true. When the authors of the new American Constitution declared, after their months of work in Philadelphia, that they had finally reached consensus, one Mrs. Powell shouted a question to the revered Benjamin Franklin, then 81 years old. Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? He gave this answer, a republic, if you can keep it. With those words, Franklin deflected the thrust of the question. True, he didn't refuse to answer a republic, he said, and not a monarchy. But in his view, the question wasn't what the framers, a band of good and great men, had given to the American people. The Constitution was not a gift. The question was what we, the people, would do with the framework that the framers had produced. The real agents, the most important actors in the nation's history were and are the you. You have a task, which is to keep it. And what you are to keep is a republic, which is what the American Revolution was fought to establish, and which is opposed to what the colonies fought against, a monarchy headed by a king who could not be removed from office and who could rule as a tyrant. From the Declaration of Independence, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. Just a few decades before he spoke, Franklin's words would have been unfathomably radical, but he captured the spirit of his age. Here's Alexander Hamilton writing in the very first of the Federalist Papers, which defended the American Constitution to a nation that was sharply divided on whether to ratify it. Hamilton sounded a lot like Franken, though much more grave. Quote, it has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable of, or not, of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. If there be any truth in that remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may, with propriety, be regarded as the era in which the decision is to be made, and a wrong election of the part we shall act may, in this view, deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. Franklin, Hamilton, and their colleagues thought a lot about impeachment. In their view, the power to impeach was central to the establishment of, quote, good government from reflection and choice. Without the power to impeach, we the people would probably have refused to ratify the convention in the first place, the Constitution. Impeachment laid at the core of the founders' intricate and majestic efforts to balance the defining Republican commitments to liberty, equality, and self-rule with the belief in a strong, energetic national government. They achieved that balance with diverse features of the Constitution, including a 4-year term for the president, electoral control, the separation of powers, and a system of individual rights. It is ironic that impeachment, regarded in 1787 as an essential component of the balance, is now little understood by the people of this country. As Exhibit 1, consider the 1970 pronouncement by Gerald Ford, then a member of Congress and later President of the United States, that an impeachable offense, quote, is whatever a majority of the House believes it to be at a given moment in history. As Exhibit 2, consider the 2017 claim by Nancy Pelosi, then the House Minority Leader and former Speaker of the House, that a president cannot be impeached unless he has broken the law. As you will see, both Ford and Pelosi got it fundamentally wrong. Their views make a mockery of the constitutional design. They are also anti-Republican, small r Republican. In American history, 3 presidents have been subject to serious impeachment proceedings: Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton. During the impeachment process against Nixon, I was in my late teens. In a way, the controversy was inspiring. We the people were rising up against a president who had apparently done awful things. But I liked Nixon, and I didn't much like the Democrats, and I was torn. Riveted by the national debates, I wondered, are people trying to impeach Nixon because they hate him and his policies, or because he actually did something terribly wrong? Like many millions of Americans, I also wondered, what is impeachment all about anyway? The very word was unfamiliar and seemed like a kind of relic, something from a bygone age. The nation and Nixon himself received an unforgettable civics lesson back then in the 1970s, but I'm not sure we got a full answer to either question. When I decided to go to law school a few years later, I can't say that I was motivated by the Nixon proceedings, but they certainly helped to inspire my interest in our constitutional system. Like many others in my law school class, I was certain that some courses would be focused on the intriguing questions raised by Nixon's resignation. Above all, what were the framers doing with that impeachment provision? What are high crimes and misdemeanors? But no class spent as much as a single minute on impeachment. It was as if the whole topic was irrelevant, part of history's dustbin, a tiny footnote to the real issues in constitutional law. Sure, we talked about the power of the president, about when he could make war, about what he could do on his own. Impeachment by Cass Sunstein. In making the world a safer place for women and girls. Pat Mitchell, Becoming a Dangerous Woman.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And welcome back to the second hour of our program. On the line with us is our buddy, Professor Richard Wolff, the economist, co-founder of democracyatwork.info, the author of numerous books, his most recent, Understanding Socialism, democracyatwork.info, of course, and rdwolff with 2 Fs.com are his websites, and you can tweet him at Prof. Wolff, PROFWOLFF. Professor Wolff, welcome back to the program. And
Thank you, Tom. Glad to be here.
So I have 2 questions for you, and I'm not sure if they're kind of the same thing or they're completely different. But the first is, you know, we're all hearing about the $2-point-something trillion that these 3 packages, almost $3 trillion that these 3 packages that Congress has passed that are going to be funded with the Treasury issuing bond, essentially borrowing money. But there's also reports of the Fed. Well, this morning, the Financial Times was talking about the Fed is going to push, $2.3 trillion out. I'm not sure exactly to who or under what circumstances. And I've seen other reports that they're going to push out as much as $4 trillion. What's the difference between those two, and where does that Fed money come from, number one? And number two, will we ever get back to normal again? And if so, what will it look like? What will that transition be?
Okay. Let's start with what seems to be, and pardon my humor, it's just I get these questions so often that they become kind of funny in the repetition. People are mystified, which I understand. Where does that money come from in both the cases of the U.S. Treasury doing what Congress passes and the Federal Reserve doing pretty much what it likes? So let's start with the Federal Reserve. Here's the thing that's so difficult. The Federal Reserve creates as much money as it thinks the situation requires. It creates it out of nothing. That's very important for people to understand, however discomforting it might be. That's their job. They used to do it in the physical sense of printing the paper bills and coining the coins that we use, the quarters and the nickels and the dimes. Nowadays, they don't do it that way. Most money is now electronic. So by hitting a key on a computer somewhere in Washington, $1 million shows up in somebody's account. It was created by the click of that mouse pad and that mouse in some corporate executive's office in the Federal Reserve. So they create money in the literal sense of that term. And the part of the crisis we're in now that they play is they have decided, the Federal Reserve, that the economy needs a ton of new money. This comes, mind you, after 20 years of record-breaking increases in the quantity of money that the Federal Reserve has produced and injected into the economy. So it comes on top of all of that. Here are trillions of additional out-of-thin-air created dollar bills and accounts at banks. And the people who get this money are overwhelmingly banks. Some insurance companies, some companies that themselves issue bonds will now be able to give them to the Federal Reserve, which will, quote-unquote, buy them using the fresh new money that they have created out of nothing to pay for them. And the whole idea is, think of it as an automobile metaphor, which isn't working real well, and you've decided that the problem isn't the motor or the condenser or this or that. It's lubrication, it's oil. And so you take a can of oil and you spray it into the front of the automobile or wherever all the equipment is, and you hope that this lubrication of literally everything with an immense dose of oil will get the thing running again. That's what the Federal Reserve is doing. Money is like oil. It makes the world go round. It makes American capitalism function, they hope. And that's what they're doing. So that's the 2 to 4 trillion you hear about from time to time. Since the Federal Reserve has no oversight, there's really nobody in charge of the Federal Reserve. They're in charge of themselves. They're given, by intent, independence, both from the Congress and from the executive branch. They're out there doing what they think is appropriate. They have conferences and discussions with others in the government, but they are their own thing. Now let's turn to the government itself, Mr. Trump and the two houses of Congress. What they do is a completely different thing. They are not allowed to create or print money. That right is given to the Federal Reserve exclusively. So what the Treasury does, it has to get whatever money it wants to pump into the economy, and they're now talking, as you said, about the $2.2 trillion, more or less. They have to get that either by taxing the people of this country, the people and the businesses, or by borrowing it. Those are the only two ways they can get the money that they want to inject into the economy. It would make no sense to tax, because then the money the government injects into the economy would be offset by the money it's pulling out in the way of taxes. So it doesn't do that. What does it do? It borrows the money. Well, here it gets kind of cute. Who does it borrow the money from? Well, the only people who lend to the government are very, very wealthy individuals and banks and insurance companies and large corporations. Nobody else is a major player in this business, with one exception, and that's foreign governments. So when the United States government borrows money, it borrows from rich people, corporations, insurance companies, banks, and foreign governments. For example, and this blows Americans' minds too, as it should, the largest creditor of the United States government is the People's Republic of China. The United States is the largest debtor country in the world. That is, our government has borrowed more than any other government, and nobody else is close. And the government that has lent to the United States is the People's Republic of China. But they've also borrowed from all kinds of other sources. So for them to do what they're doing is basically saying to corporations and the rich, look, we're in a crisis. You have no place to use your money. Your money is sitting there doing you no good, and it's not good for the economy that it isn't active. So here's the deal. Lend it to us, the U.S. government. We will not only pay you back, we'll pay you interest while we hold it, and we're going to make sure it gets spent. So that's really what this government stimulus is about. It's taking money doing nothing from people who have a lot of money doing nothing, which excludes 90% of our population, of course. It borrows from the rich in order to keep going an economy that is dominated by those same rich institutions. If this sounds incestuous, good, then I've been clear in my explanation. The fact that both the Fed wants to create trillions of new money after doing it for 20 years, and that the Treasury and the Congress want to inject another several trillion, gives you an idea of how severely depressed the U.S. economy now is.
Yeah, I get it. I absolutely get it. And we're going to hit a break here in about 25 seconds. So I'm guessing probably next week our topic should be, what does recovery look like and how does it take place? Do you see any problems with the Fed doing this?
Enormous problems. Enormous problems. You know, people like to say, well, the Fed did it last time. It didn't make an inflation. It did. The inflation was in the stock market, which has now crashed. That's a very serious, bad side effect.
Yeah, okay, and we can dig into that a little deeper next week, too. Professor Richard Wolff, democracyatwork.info, rdwolf with 2fs.com. You can tweet him at Prof. Wolf. Professor Wolff, thank you again for dropping by.
My pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And we'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Let's see here. Terry in Santa Barbara, California. Hey, Terry, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Thank you so much for everything, and may you and yours continue to be healthy and safe. Homeowners need to know
Thank you.
If you are with Chase Mortgage, at the end of the 3-month forbearance period, they're going to demand a balloon payment, and they're going to want you to pay the whole thing, and I'm very worried that they're going to foreclose. We're retired mom-and-pop landlords with a rental house where we used to live, and our tenant has a restaurant that's closed and he can't pay the rent. They'll give us this forbearance, but at the end of everything, they're going to ask for it back, and there will be a huge foreclosure, bunch of foreclosures unless somebody tries to stop it. And so I really hope that there's something somebody can do about that, and the people who are with Chase will be able to save their houses. We've been paying for ours for more than 20 years. And you know what else? I'm kind of worried right now that I'm not on the radio. I'm just on the part that doesn't have commercials. Is that the case?
Yeah, but that's about 2/3 of our total audience. So
great. Oh, good. That's what I wanted.
And we had somebody calling yesterday. Yeah, we had somebody call in yesterday who also said that same problem with Chase. Apparently, this is endemic. Have you reached out to your member of Congress, Terry?
No, I haven't, but we live in a state where I don't have to worry, but I surely will. I will. I wonder, how could I reach out to other members of Congress that are not my state representatives? Would I be
You could
able
just
to
call
tell
the House of Representatives. Generally speaking, if you just call a representative, if they don't represent you, they'll say no thanks. But if you call a representative who's the chair of a committee, then they, that has something to do with this, like the chair of the Banking Commission.
Okay, good.
I'm trying to recall who that is. I'm not sure, actually.
Chair of the Banking Commission. Okay. I'm just really worried that
the banking
committee one on everybody and have a lot of foreclosures.
Oh, I get it. I totally get it. And I think you're absolutely right, Terry. The number for Congress is 202-224-3121. So give them a call and see what you can do. Zach, Terry, good luck. Zach in North Hollywood, California. Hey, Zach, what's up?
Good morning, Tom. Do you think if at long last we let the financial sector take the fall when they mismanage airline companies, housing markets, and departments of government, do you think they would change their behavior? and behave differently if we actually were able to part out their failed companies and put any losses right straight back into the Treasury? If they knew there was not going to be a golden parachute for CEOs, and we're just going to take the losses, put it right back into the Treasury, would they behave?
Oh, in that case, perhaps. But I think the more important thing, Zach, rather than just restoring accountability, is to actually change the rules of the game. In 1999, a Republican Congress and a Democratic president did away with Glass-Steagall and allowed normal checkbook banks like Wells Fargo to start gambling with your deposits in your checking account, your savings account. And that led to the crash of 2008, and that's still here, and that's one of the things that's going to be fueling this crash. And so we need to change the rules of the game. We need to go back to Glass-Steagall, and we need to go back to strong regulations of our banks. It's just very, very simple. We'll be back. We're hitting 20 minutes past the hour here in just a few seconds. Stick around. We'll be back with more of your calls. And I got a bit of a rant here for you right after this. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And, a lot of us have settled into a new routine. Those of us who are sheltering in place or staying home, not going out. There's a downside and an upside, I suppose. One of the potential upsides, I think, going forward is that we might see an enhancement in gender equality, not just in the workplace, but also at home. Dads are stuck with their kids and they're doing homework and things like that, and, housework, more flexible work arrangements. If these stick, that will be a good thing for working parents where you've got, both mom and dad in the workplace. But what do you think, what has your experience been so far of this? And how do you think it's going to, things might change going forward? Or how do you think they should change going forward? Are you all excited about working from home, or do you really miss getting dressed up and going to the office and hanging out with people? I think one of the things that we're finding from all of this is that a lot of stuff that goes on at work, whether it's the office or the assembly line or the supermarket or wherever it may be that you work, one of the main things that happens there, and it probably occupies about half the total time we're at work, obviously it varies from job to job, or as much as half of the time, is social interaction, which we're all kind of missing right now, although, we're figuring out how to use Zoom and FaceTime and things like that to get it. So I'm just curious, your thoughts on that. Feel free to give us a call. Where do you think this is going to, in terms of, work, home, all that kind of stuff? Meanwhile, Vice President Pence's office is trying to strong-arm CNN into carrying Dear Leader's entire 2- and 3-hour rants every night. If this is starting to remind you of Hugo Chavez, maybe that's a good recollection. Now Hugo Chavez was famous for doing these long rants on TV and every day coming on during Trump prime time and stuff and just ranting about stuff for an hour or two. There is a really distinct difference between Trump and Chavez. Chavez was ranting about how we have to help poor people. We have to get food to people. We have to get medical services to people. He was highlighting the issues in the favelas, the slums of Venezuela. Trump, of course, is highlighting how the banksters need more money and, his rich buddies and, all this kind of stuff. And, of course, Trump is talking about how he wants to open his hotels back up and his golf courses. He's starting to get frantic. I don't know if Deutsche Bank has come through with the loan extensions for him or not. The guy is not rich at all. He's deeply in debt, probably several $1 billion in debt, certainly $1 billion. Most of it, or much of it, to Deutsche Bank, a lot of it probably to other oligarchs around the world. So Donald Trump is trying to do his Hugo Chavez imitation, but it's a poor man's imitation because he's no Hugo Chavez. He's no champion of the people. But he's trying to do this every night, and CNN, sickened by the lies and distortions and naked campaigning, like last night when Trump went on, and after the Democratic governor, Jared Polis of Colorado, had begged the federal administration, the Trump administration, for ventilators. Then Cory Gardner, who's probably the most endangered Democrat or Republican in the Senate. Cory Gardner, the guy who lied about his support for the heartbeat bill back 6 years ago to get himself reelected, and Mara Liasson went along with those lies on NPR, which just made me crazy. But in any case, Cory Gardner called the White House. And so last night, Trump goes, I got a call from Cory Gardner. He's one of the really great guys, blah, 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 Cory Gardner this, Cory Gardner that. He's trying to help out a Republican. And he says, and we're going to get 100 ventilators to Colorado right away. And you've got a couple of members of Congress who are just rip-roaring PO'd about this, that this is the case. But anyhow, Pence is saying, which is where I started this whole rant, Pence is saying to CNN, you may not have Anthony Fauci anymore, and you may not have Deborah Birx anymore, the two doctors who are, or medical experts, officials, the head of the CDC and the head of HHS. You may not have these people anymore because you don't carry the entire presidential Hugo Chavez monologue, with, intending no disrespect to Hugo Chavez. And I mean, this is just wrong. And perhaps criminal, certainly politically criminal, if it's not legally criminal. By the way, the member of Congress who's really bent out of shape about Cory Gardner getting all those strokes last night and getting the ventilators when the Democrats have been begging for them is Representative Diane DeJette, who is a Democrat of Colorado. And she went on CNN last night and said, this is what's going on. So, meanwhile, Jerry Falwell has his own show. Did you know that? Jerry Falwell has his own show. Right. I don't know if his pool boy is in the show. This pool boy that he and his wife met when they were on vacation down in Florida, and he ended up giving him $1 million and flying him all around the world, just the two of them together. And the pool boy, I think one of the things he bought was a gay nightclub. But Jerry Falwell Jr. On his show last night said, we have arrest warrants out against a couple of reporters. Specifically, that was from ProPublica, Alec McGillis, the reporter, and the New York Times photographer, Julia Rendelman. And it sounded really ominous, and Fox, oh my God, arrest warrants for reporters. Well, it turns out no judge signed them, no clerk signed them. They weren't submitted to the court. He's got an 8-man police force at Liberty University. And he filled out a piece of paper and said, this is an arrest warrant for these people. You arrest them if they show up, and it's totally not legal. It's bizarre. I mean, the world is just getting weird as we watch this. Meanwhile, actually, I think I'll put the rest of the news on a hold until the top of the next hour, and then we'll pick that up then. I'll pick up your phone calls after the break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
A lot going on in the world. Trump is now saying, won't be so many people. There won't be 250,000 people dead. If that's the case, did he lie to us at the beginning to set a new level of expectations? Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. And this is from the introduction titled Thinking Big Again. Across the globe, countries, including in the developing world, look to emulate the success of the U.S. economy. In doing so, they look at the power of, quote, market-driven, end quote, mechanisms versus what might seem like old-style state-driven mechanisms in places like Europe or the ex-Soviet Union. But the United States is not what it seems. The preacher of the small state, free market doctrine has for decades been directing
large public investment programs in technology and innovation that underlie its past and current economic success. From the internet to biotech and even shale gas, the U.S. state has been the key driver of innovation-led growth, willing to invest in the most uncertain phase in the innovation cycle and let business hop on for the easier ride down the way. If the rest of the world wants to emulate the U.S. model, they should do as the United States actually did, not as it says it did. More state, not less. A key part of this lesson should be to learn how to organize, direct, and evaluate state investments so that they can be strategic, flexible, and mission-oriented. Only in this way will top minds find it an honor to work for the state. This is something that needs to be understood not only by the rest of the world, but in the United States itself, where the dominant political narrative is endangering funding for future innovation and economic growth. In 2013, U.S. government spending for basic research fell below what it was a decade earlier, and most likely will continue to fall due to congressional gridlock over the public budget. Rather than static discussions about the size of the deficit, there must be more debate about its actual composition, how to invest strategically in key areas such as research and development, R&D, education, and human capital formation that will increase gross domestic product, the GDP, in the future, bringing the debt-GDP ratio down as a consequence. And how to engage in a debate about the direction of change so that such investments will lead to growth that is not only smarter, that is innovation-led, but also more inclusive and sustainable. These issues are urgent with the upcoming 2016 U.S. presidential election, which could, if properly informed, change the parameters of the current static debate. The United States desperately needs politicians with the courage to swim against the tide of popular rhetoric and outline a bolder vision for the state's dynamic role in fostering the economic growth of the future. In emerging economies such as China, the public sector is indeed investing billions in green technologies with the expectation that these industries will be the engines of future growth. The United States could take inspiration from its own history. In 1961, an American president set out a bold, ambitious, and risky mission to send a man to the moon. Who will have the courage to set out a new vision for America today? Addressing today's societal challenges, for example, those around climate change, requires a vision, a mission, and most of all, confidence about the state's role in the economy. As eloquently argued by Keynes in The End of Laissez-Faire in 1926, the important thing for government is not to do things which individuals are doing already and to do them a little better or a little worse, but to do those things which at present are not done at all. End of quote. This, however, requires the public sector to have vision and confidence, increasingly missing today. Why? What is the role of the public sector in economic growth? After the financial crisis, with public budgets bloated, mainly due to their role in saving the private sector, across the globe we are hearing that in order for nations to be competitive, innovative, and dynamic, we must have more market and less state. As at best, we are told, governments merely facilitate the economic dynamism of the private sector. At worst, their lumbering, heavy-handed, and bureaucratic institutions actively inhibit it. The fast-moving, risk-loving, and pioneering private sector, by contrast, is what really drives the type of innovation that creates economic growth. According to this view, the secret behind an engine of innovation like Silicon Valley lies in its entrepreneurs and venture capitalists. The state can intervene in the economy, but only to fix market failures or to level the playing field. It can regulate the private sector in order to account for the external costs companies may impose on the public, like pollution, and it can invest in public goods, such as basic scientific research or the development of drugs with little market potential. To some on the political right, even fixing market failures would be a sin, because such attempts would lead to worse outcomes in the form of government failures. What all these views have in common is the assumption that the state should stick to fixing markets, not directly trying to create and shape them. A 2012 Economist article on the future of manufacturing encapsulates this common misperception. This book is committed to dismantling this false image, which underpins a global trend promoted by conservative economists, politicians, and the media of bashing and diminishing the importance of the state. It focuses on what Tony Judt called a discursive battle. How we talk about the state matters. Depicting private business as the innovative force while the state is cast as the inertial one necessary for the basics but too large and heavy to be the dynamic engine, is a description that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we continue to depict the state, continues. So the book is The Entrepreneurial State by Mariana Mazzucato. Identity had become to so many facets of my life. The book by Christopher Wiley.
Coming up in the science revolution is Mad King Trump deciding which states will live and which states will die. Associate Professor of Economics Pavlina Tcherneva is here to talk about what would FDR do about COVID-19. The last Democratic governor of Alabama, Don Siegelman, drops by to talk about how prisons are handling the coronavirus and what they should do. In Geeky Science, attorney and regulatory policy advocate with Public Citizen Amit Narang is here, asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and just keeping you up to date on things that are going on here. This from the American Bridge. Last night, Vice President Mike Pence, head of the coronavirus task force, went on Sean Hannity's show to spin lies and attempt to whitewash the coronavirus failure for which he and Trump are responsible. This is what this is hysterical, right? I mean, you've got before I read Pence's quote, let me just share with you what's actually going on. This from a news story. Christy Kalick has worked in the past decade in the emergency department at Detroit's Sinai Grace. She never expected anything like this. She said, we've run out of stretchers. We've run out of body bags. Patients end up in the emergency department hallways using oxygen tanks. One night they even ran out of oxygen tanks, so the staff ran oxygen tubing from patients' room to people in the hallways. She said, we've never had patients like this who crash so fast out of nowhere. One smiling, the next minute they're down. She said, even when you put them on ventilators, you have to sedate them. You have to induce a coma, basically, before you can put a person on a ventilator, because you got to shove a tube all the way down into their lungs. And she says, so you have to put them on multiple drips, which brings down their blood pressure, and then you have to monitor that, and they're still waking up and having things happen out of nowhere. She said you can't take breaks. She's got a colleague who is, a fellow nurse who is now on a ventilator, struggling for his life. She said we need to do something drastic to get attention. Now, this is just in Detroit. 3 Michigan healthcare workers have died from coronavirus. 1,500 people at the Beaumont Health Hospital in Metro Detroit. 1,500 are out sick with COVID symptoms, including 500 nurses. Henry Ford System says 700 of their workers have tested positive. University of Michigan, 728 of their healthcare workers have tested positive. 2/3 of all the people who have tested positive in Bay County are healthcare workers. This is what's actually going on. And it's all because for 2.5, 3 months, Donald Trump lied to the American people. Mike Pence lied to the American people, said, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. We don't need to be ordering personal protective equipment. In fact, we can ship it overseas. We were shipping this stuff overseas right up until last week. We don't need extra ventilators. We don't need to get ready for anything because there's not going to be anything. One day, it's just like a miracle. It's going to vanish. So this is what Mike Pence, this lying former right-wing talk show host from Indiana, had to say to Sean Hannity last night. He, Trump, has directed us to spare no expense to make sure that we have the broadest amount of testing available, new testing developed, and most importantly, our healthcare workers in America have the resources, the protective equipment, and the ventilators to be able to provide the level of care to people struggling with the coronavirus. I don't even have a word for how disgusting lies are about life and death. And lies like the lies that were told over and over and over again by Trump and on Trump TV over at Fox so-called News. By these scumbags who go on they were doing it last night, minimizing, this is, we're going to be back to normal any day now. It's just a terrible flu, This is just obscene. Barbara in Kingston, New York. Hey, Barbara, what's on your mind today?
Well, I'm just responding to your question. How has the lockdown affected you? And what do I think about working from home? Well, I was an innkeeper, and I can't work from home. But how it's affecting me is we had created a situation where people could have a long breakfast, and we encouraged people to have conversation. So we had people come from all over the world, and what I miss is the information, because you could find out, well, what's really going on in your country, and also exchange about what's really going on here. And I feel like all of us being isolated in our little bubbles, that's no longer possible. You know, for example, we had guests come from Greece after that fell apart, and to find, I'd asked them, well, what's it like over there? And they're like, all the old people have lost their pension, which somehow didn't really hit home the extremity about how bad that crash was over there. So that's what I miss, is communication other than it all going through the internet,
Yeah. Okay, Barbara, thank you. Thank you for sharing that story with us. It's great. I appreciate it. Noelle in Corpus Christi, Texas. Hey, Noelle, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I have a question. I don't know if you can help, and I missed Congresswoman, unfortunately. I'm self-employed, but just myself. I'm contracted with a company that does veterans exams for disabilities. The VA has stopped the exams because they're in-person exams. I don't know of any program that would allow me to get, I can't get unemployment because technically I'm not employed. I'm a contracted person. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Any suggestions or thoughts on that?
Congresswoman Jayapal said that there is a provision in this last $2 trillion bill that they passed specifically for gig workers, contract workers, people who get 1099s. And so I would encourage you to maybe call your member of Congress, even if it's a Republican. I don't know Corpus Christi. I don't know who represents you. And just say, I'm an independent contractor. Can you give me some help? Yeah, Republicans want to help their constituents too. They want to get reelected. So, just don't call up and say I'm a Democrat. but there are apparently provisions in that bill, and I'm not well informed enough to be able to speak beyond that. But that's what Representative Paul said. Noelle, good luck with that. I wish you the very best. George in Chicago. Hey, George, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. Just very briefly, I would like to go back to my job if it still exists in the future. I miss the people I work with, but a company, a small business that had about 170 or so employees is now down to a skeleton force of 9. And just miss the clients and being with other people around from all over the place on a daily basis. But what I called about was to add on to a point that was made in your conversation with the Congresswoman. After 18,000 lies, there's no surprises as to how deep Trump will go to obfuscate and conceal and rabble-rouse. But this business about Chinese Americans and others of Asian descent being attacked and beaten because supposedly they brought the virus here, and this is being egged on by Trump's rhetoric. It's completely false. Within the last day or two, I believe both the New York Times and Business Insider had articles that say that scientific analysis of the coronavirus in New York shows that almost all of it came to New York from European travelers. It's the European version of the virus. Right. And so
probably Italy and Spain,
they have to know this, but I think it's also a measure of their desperation because the little bump up he got in approval rating last week has already started to nose down. And I think we all have to be very vigilant for the next 7 months because they will stop at nothing, literally.
Yeah. Well, and this use of the media, threatening the CNN that they can't get experts on to inform the American public if they don't carry dear leader, Hugo Trump's speeches is just beyond the pale. I mean, it's just absolutely disgusting.
And I agree. There's like there are no boundaries for this guy. Yeah. Thank you very much for the call, George. Alan in Bellevue, Washington. Hey, Alan, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Well, I was watching CBS this morning, and Gayle King was interviewing David Solomon of Goldman Sachs. And they've decided to enter the small business loan market. And this is on top of the Fed's bailing out the small businesses. So they're going to dedicate $500 million of Goldman Sachs's money to help the small business owner. Now, the last time I checked, the reason that a corporation exists is to make a profit. And nobody can accuse Goldman Sachs of being altruistic.
Right. The federal government loans them money at less than 1%. They can loan the money out at a higher percentage, number one. Number two, the federal government backstops those loans. So if those small businesses fail, Goldman Sachs will be made whole by the Fed or by the Treasury Department. And so, yeah, of course, I don't know the specifics or details on Goldman Sachs, but all of these banks are being backstopped on these loans. I mean, it's just the Treasury and the Fed are both just like pouring money. I think Richard Wolff's analogy of just spraying a couple of gallons of oil into an engine, a car engine, in the hopes that some of it will make its way into the pistons, is a pretty damn good analogy to what's going on. Alan, thank you for the call, and thanks for raising the issue. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll continue with your phone calls in just a moment. Want to get into the Fed testing facilities at the top of the hour. These drive-up testing facilities. Turns out there's a little more to the story. It's getting very interesting and very weird out there. We'll be back with more of your calls.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Oh, and yesterday when Trump came on MSNBC and CNN, I went to BBC, and he was there too. We had to go to France 24 to get away from that orange blob. And welcome back. Rick in Woodstock, Illinois, watching Free Speech TV. Hey, Rick, what's up?
Nothing, Tom. Just was, I've been going to the store and shop, and, you go in there with your mask and everything, but the people that work in there, they ain't wearing masks or anything. I just don't understand how they think this thing is going to end when everybody's doing whatever they want. It just doesn't make any sense.
Well, and they're endangering you. I mean, what we know now is that basically there's a breath cloud around everyone that extends several feet out from them. And the alarming one that I saw this morning, because when Louise and I are out walking, very often joggers will run by us. And it's that joggers are breathing so hard, they're blowing out a breath cloud that could go 10, 12 feet around them. It's more like coughing. And so, you've got workers in the stores who are breathing, and they've got this cloud of virus around them if they happen to be asymptomatic. And, of course, there's no way to know whether they are infected or not, because Donald Trump never thought to provide us with test kits. And so all I can say, Rick, is that hopefully Governor Pritzker will, amend his order for Illinois, for the state of Illinois, to include the fact that anybody in public has to be wearing a mask. I believe that Oregon just did that. I'm pretty sure that New York City, that Bill de Blasio did that in New York City. I think that this is coming to individual states around the country. And of course, Fauci and company day before yesterday said that we should all be doing this. And then, Trump made light of it and said, he doesn't want to mess up his hair or his, he doesn't want to wipe off his bronzer, I guess, is probably his biggest concern, that the orange goop he puts on his face every day.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing is that, I want to hug my granddaughter again. I want to go see her and hug her again and that. And with this, it's going to be a long time. And let me just say one more thing to everybody. Remember, creeps hang with creeps. Thank you, Tom.
There you go. You're welcome. Pence and Trump. Yeah, amen. Thank you very much for the call. Marcia in Winter Park, Florida. Hey, Marcia, what's on your mind today?
Well, I had a question, and then there were two rants. One about that I would like to respond to. One was about either the predictions about how things are going to come out on the other side of this, and the other one I took notes. The TV coverage thing on that. Which one would you like me to speak about? My question.
Your choice. You have a minute.
Or those other two. I'm sorry?
I said it's your choice. You have a minute. Now you have 50 seconds.
Oh, God, I was asking for you to decide. Anyway, on the outcome thing, when you asked Richard Wolff that, it's like we're all in the fog of war. And if you're a gamer, it's like you can only see so far. There's no visibility. So predictions are pretty hard. Yesterday, when Bernie quit, I was in the depths of evil. The world is too evil for anything good to survive. That was a terrible day. And I'm past that now. I live in Florida, so I think about the hurricane season. When the data that they collect during hurricane season, based on atmospheric conditions after this shutdown where we've turned off the lights worldwide for, 50%, 75% of the time?
Right.
That will be awesome to find out what it's done. And here's my question.
Yeah, it will be.
If you know it. What do the gas prices that are at almost 1970s level have to do with our economy?
Right at the moment, very little, but the economy basically, a good chunk of the economy runs on gasoline, and that's the big variable. It affects Did you know that consumer Ronald spending.
Reagan
committed treason to become president in 1980, and George Herbert Walker Bush was in on it, and he avoided being prosecuted for this in 1992 with a little help from Bill Barr? It's on page 116 of my book, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. So over at ThomHartmann.com, we just put up a new video for our supporters, the people who support our program, that talks about Malcolm X saying, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are oppressed and loving the people who are the oppressors. He said that 55 years ago to, this month, February, in 1965. And, what that actually means, how that warning from Malcolm X was apparently taken to heart by the Republican Party in 1981 through the Reagan presidency. And we actually saw this shift in America to the point where, that led to everything. Stop and frisk and the demonization of homeless people and the demonization of poor people and black people and Muslim people and all of this stuff came out of this very specific kind of Lee Atwater strategy in the 1980s. So you can find it over at ThomHartmann.com and check it out. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Brian in Roselle, Illinois. Am I saying that right, Brian?
Yes, you are. Thanks for letting me on. I just wanted to share an observation I heard in another media outlet. It was by a hedge fund manager based primarily in Silicon Valley. And the point he was making was, the previous conservative theory of shrinking government and cutting taxes is completely out the window. That is gone.
Right.
And what's going to happen is all levels of government are going to be spending unprecedented amounts of money. He says unbelievable amounts of money. Primarily the federal government. It's very realistic that to get our economy back on track, our federal government's got to spend basically twice what we already have in national debt. Maybe another $20
Right. My
trillion.
prediction 2 weeks ago was $10 trillion.
Right. So, and his observation was both sides know this. The Republicans know this, and of course we know this. So, the real fight is over who's going to control it. That's where the real fight's at. And the Republicans
and how it gets spent. I mean, this is this next piece of legislation. Mitch McConnell is saying we want to give money to the banks and we want absolutely no oversight. And the Democrats are saying, no, you want to give money to small lending institutions, community banks, and we're going to have vigorous oversight because these smaller banks are the ones that operate in minority communities in big cities and things like this, and in some rural areas for that matter, that are not served by large banks. But the Republicans just want to give it all to the billionaires and the fat cats.
Well, as it stands right now, President Trump basically can give away $500 billion any way he wants to.
That's right.
And we're set to spend trillions
and he's put his daughter in charge of it, by the way.
Right. But this is going to be a fight like heck for the next presidential election in November. And I think the Democratic Party is failing on their messaging strategy. It's just, Trump does his circus show every day, and we're not really hearing a unified, coherent message from anybody on how serious this is, what it's going to take to right the economy, and why the Democrats need to be the ones to do it. And someone's got to do it. And I don't know if Joe Biden's not up to it or what, but someone's got to get out there and pound that message home.
Yeah. I am with you, Brian. Thank you very much for the call. Joanne in, hang on just a second here. Joanne in Belhaven, North Carolina. Hey, Joanne, what's on your mind today?
Oh, yes, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call. The caller before you kind of alluded to the $500 billion that is in the stimulus package, and that now I'm really worried because the IG has been fired by Trump. He was supposed to have some oversight.
And he put
into
Ivanka Trump in charge of passing out the money, by the way. You think any of it's going to go to her brother?
Everything's going to go to the brother, the family, and the friends. I'm really worried about the Congress. What role will they play? How will they have some control or have some say as to what's happening with this money?
Well, they did two things. They put an IG, an inspector general, in charge, and Trump, in his signing statement, said he's going to ignore him, and now he's fired him. And then the second thing they did is they created a joint or a congressional committee, a bipartisan congressional committee to provide oversight, but no congressional committees are meeting right now. So bottom line, Trump gets to use this as a slush fund, and Ivanka gets to pass it out to her friends and family.
Yes, because we know that Trump is broke. He has no money. And we know now that this might be what he is looking for to bring himself back to what he wants to be. He wants to be like any of the other billionaires that he admires. He's not one, and he wants to be one. So I cannot believe this is happening in our country. I really cannot believe this. And what can be done as a citizen? I'm going to call the Nancy Pelosi of that committee. I'm going to call as many people as I can. But who would you recommend that I call to keep calling and writing?
I would be calling my friends and family, Joanne. I think that's the more important thing right now. The Democrats are united in their outrage and their fury about this. The big thing is, you're in North Carolina. You need to make sure that you're getting a vote by mail ballot this fall. And all of your friends need to be sure that they have signed up, even if it takes a doctor's slip. Call your doctor now, that they have signed up for vote by mail, for absentee ballots or whatever it's called in your state. There is an election coming, and the Republicans are going to try to contest this election and throw it into the House of Representatives, where Trump will get reelected. And the only way around that is to have a robust enough turnout in the fall that they can't contest it. And that means, there's going to be a second wave of this virus, and it's going to be in the fall, and just in time for the election. It's predictable given, how successful the shelter in place is going. So what we need to do is be telling every single person we know, and particularly the people who live in red states or in states where it's harder to vote by mail, to get their absentee ballots. Get ready. There's a damn election coming, and there's very, very little time. Very little time. Joanne, I share your outrage, and I honor and congratulate your desire to do something about it. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
Hello, I'm Casey Hartmann.
We say fight back!
So every 5 years, the U.S. Department of Agriculture comes out with new guidelines, and we just put up a video over at thomhartmann.com for supporters of our program that talks about how the Trump administration, in this insanely corrupt deal with the $100 billion industry of ultra-processed, high-sugar, high-salt, high-fat foods that is literally killing 700,000 Americans a year, has said, oh, we're going to change the guidelines so that these fast food, high-processed food companies can shovel their stuff into our school lunch programs, into our kids. We're going to change the guidelines so people aren't informed about the importance of, dialing back somewhat on meat and on salt and sugar and all these other things. It's nuts. You can check the whole thing out over at thomhartmann.com. Look for the video for our, the supporters of our program at thomhartmann.com.
Today's book in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Impeachment, A Citizen's Guide by Cass R. Sunstein. This is from Chapter 1, titled Majesty and Mystery. It's an old story, and it's probably even true. When the authors of the new American Constitution declared, after their months of work in Philadelphia, that they had finally reached consensus, one Mrs. Powell shouted a question to the revered Benjamin Franklin, then 81 years old. Dr. Franklin, what have you given us, a monarchy or a republic? He gave this answer, a republic, if you can keep it. With those words, Franklin deflected the thrust of the question. True, he didn't refuse to answer a republic, he said, and not a monarchy. But in his view, the question wasn't what the framers, a band of good and great men, had given to the American people. The Constitution was not a gift. The question was what we, the people, would do with the framework that the framers had produced. The real agents, the most important actors in the nation's history were and are the you. You have a task, which is to keep it. And what you are doing to keep, what you are to keep is a republic, which is what the American Revolution was fought to establish, and which is opposed to what the colonies fought against, a monarchy headed by a king who could not be removed from office and who could rule as a tyrant. From the Declaration of Independence, the history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. Just a few decades before he spoke, Franklin's words would have been unfathomably radical, but he captured the spirit of his age. Here's Alexander Hamilton writing in the very first of the Federalist Papers, which defended the American Constitution to a nation that was sharply divided on whether to ratify it. Hamilton sounded a lot like Franken, though much more grave. Quote, it has been frequently remarked that it seems to have been reserved to the people of this country, by their conduct and example, to decide the important question, whether societies of men are really capable of, or not, of establishing good government from reflection and choice, or whether they are forever destined to depend for their political constitutions on accident and force. If there be any truth in that remark, the crisis at which we are arrived may, with propriety, be regarded as the era in which the decision is to be made, and a wrong election of the part we shall act may, in this view, deserve to be considered as the general misfortune of mankind. Franklin, Hamilton, and their colleagues thought a lot about impeachment. In their view, the power to impeach was central to the establishment of, quote, good government from reflection and choice. Without the power to impeach, we the people would probably have refused to ratify the convention in the first place, the Constitution. Impeachment laid at the core of the founders' intricate and majestic efforts to balance the defining Republican commitments to liberty, equality, and self-rule with the belief in a strong, energetic national government. They achieved that balance with diverse features of the Constitution, including a 4-year term for the president, electoral control, the separation of powers, and a system of individual rights. It is ironic that impeachment, regarded in 1787 as an essential component of the balance, is now little understood by the people of this country. As Exhibit 1, consider the 1970 pronouncement by Gerald Ford, then a member of Congress and later President of the United States, that an impeachable offense, quote, is whatever a majority of the House believes it to be at a given moment in history. As Exhibit 2, consider the 2017 claim by Nancy Pelosi, then the House Minority Leader and former Speaker of the House, that a president cannot be impeached unless he has broken the law. As you will see, both Ford and Pelosi got it fundamentally wrong. Their views make a mockery of the constitutional design. They are also anti-Republican, small r Republican. In American history, 3 presidents have been subject to serious impeachment proceedings: Andrew Johnson, Richard Nixon, and Bill Clinton. During the impeachment process against Nixon, I was in my late teens. In a way, the controversy was inspiring. We, the people, were rising up against a president who had apparently done awful things. But I liked Nixon, and I didn't much like the Democrats, and I was torn. Riveted by the national debates, I wondered, are people trying to impeach Nixon because they hate him and his policies, or because he actually did something terribly wrong? Like many millions of Americans, I also wondered, what is impeachment all about anyway? The very word was unfamiliar and seemed like a kind of relic, something from a bygone age. The nation and Nixon himself received an unforgettable civics lesson back then in the 1970s, but I'm not sure we got a full answer to either question. When I decided to go to law school a few years later, I can't say that I was motivated by the Nixon proceedings, but they certainly helped to inspire my interest in our constitutional system. Like many others in my law school class, I was certain that some courses would be focused on the intriguing questions raised by Nixon's resignation. Above all, what were the framers doing with that impeachment provision? What are high crimes and misdemeanors? But no class spent as much as a single minute on impeachment. It was as if the whole topic was irrelevant, part of history's dustbin, a tiny footnote to the real issues in constitutional law. Sure, we talked about the power of the president, about when he could make war, about what he could do on his own. Impeachment by Cass Sunstein. Watching the television that sat in the corner of my mother's wooden vanity dresser. Moving Forward by Corinne Jean-Pierre.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. While Donald Trump is saying that we can't allow mail-in voting, it's rife with fraud and it helps Democrats. Well, it does help Democrats because more people vote, and that always helps Democrats. But it doesn't, there is no evidence of fraud associated with mail-in vote. We've been mail-in voting here for over a decade in Oregon, in Washington State, in Utah, in Hawaii, I believe Arizona. No problem, no fraud. But Donald Trump doesn't like it. The Republican Party doesn't like it. But the voters do. It turns out 79% of Democrats want to vote by mail this fall. And 65% of Republicans want to vote by mail this fall. Just, a little FYI for you. And Donald Trump says that he's creating a new task force, a new pandemic task force. This one will have no medical professionals. It's all about how to open or reopen the Trump golf courses and the Trump hotels and a few other businesses. That's really what it's all about, honest to God. It's going to be nothing but, quote, economic advisors. By the way, Passover began last night, and so, whatever the appropriate greeting for the season is, happy Passover or blessed Passover. I think that, I wrote this piece last week or so, and I think I retweeted one of them yesterday. It was in Salon. About Mad King Trump, that someday we would look back on Trump the way we look back on Gilgamesh, who committed a grave sin against the gods and was punished for it by environmental destruction back 7,000 years ago. Actually, it's probably more like 4,000 years ago, but whatever. And so, with my Mad King Donald article, I was referencing the Passover story, which is in part the Easter story as well, or at least part of it is, which is that, the Pharaoh refused to let the Jews go. And so God sent a series of punishments. And the ultimate one, the final one, the most horrible one, was he struck dead the firstborn of all the Egyptians without striking dead the firstborn of the Jews. And it was because they put a little bit of lamb's blood over the front of their front doors, and thus setting up the story. I mean, this was all pre-Jesus, right? Setting up the story of today, saying, I'm protected by the blood of the lamb. It's a direct reference to that, and this is the this Passover story. The angel of death passed over their houses. So, I think it's fascinating. Remember when Donald Trump back in March 13th, he came out and he had a bunch of corporate CEOs around him and, hey, everything's cool and we got this under control and this, Google is going to, they got 1,700 engineers working on creating a website so that you can figure out how to get your test. It was a lie. He was literally lying through his teeth when he said it. Google didn't know what the hell he was talking about. When Google didn't do it, Jared Kushner's brother took a bunch of federal money and created a website like this, and it didn't work either. But the other thing that he said when he was lying through his teeth on March 13th, as he does pretty much every day, why the hell are the networks still carrying this, by the way? I mentioned just before the last break, I've gotten in the habit of when Trump comes on MSNBC or CNN, whichever one I'm watching, or just happens to be playing in the house, I immediately go to BBC. Well, yesterday I went to BBC and there was Trump doing his press conference, or his Hugo Chavez rant, his campaign rally. I mean, let's call them what they are. They're campaign rallies. He was boosting Cory Gardner yesterday, the Republican from Colorado. And it's like, my God, I can't escape this guy. So, instead I went to France 24. And they were actually doing some really good reporting on what's going on in Europe with this virus and, some of the downside and some of the upside. But in any case, the second lie that Trump told was that, because he had a bunch of big box retailer CEOs there, he says, these CEOs, these Walmarts and big, and Best Buys or whatever it was, I forget the names of the companies, but he said they're going to put, you've got, tens of thousands of giant parking lots all across the United States. We're going to put drive-up testing centers in them. Thousands of them, all over the country, right away. Turns out it was a complete lie. Again, they didn't even know that he was going to say this. This guy just pulls stuff out of his backside and then sprays it all over us. They didn't know what was going on, so everybody scrambled, and so they finally created 5 drive-up testing centers, but you could only get tested in one of these 5 drive-up tests, nationwide, 5 of them. You could only get tested if you were a healthcare worker. So Trump, not only set up a false expectation and lied through his teeth, but even when they tried to implement it, they didn't do what he said. Well, guess what happens tomorrow? The funding for those 5 drive-up centers goes away. They're going to close down. He just can't stop lying. And the networks can't stop carrying him because it's a repeat of 2016. As long as Trump is doing a show that will enhance the profits of the networks, they're going to keep putting him on TV. And the more they put him on TV, I mean, this is how Hugo Chavez got popular. Well, actually, he got popular by helping the little guy. Trump is doing the opposite, but this is just nuts. I got a note. I mentioned a couple of weeks ago that there's a pharmacy that a mail pharmacy that I've used on and off for years, and they have actually been sending out emails to their customers, keeping them up to date on things. And I got this email yesterday from this firm. I don't want to name the pharmacy, but I got this email yesterday from this mail-based pharmacy, regular pharmacy. This isn't one of those companies that sells, hair pills and ED pills or something like that. This is just a regular pharmacy. And here's what they said. The headline of their email is, "The Challenges of the Drug Supply Chain Due to the Coronavirus." And I'll just read to you a piece of this. He says, one of the reasons we've previously mentioned that this is causing delivery delays, they started talking about, you may experience extended delivery times. One of the reasons that is causing these delivery delays is the difficulty in procuring pharmaceutical inventory due to the high demand for pharmaceuticals worldwide at this time. In a CNBC article, they said, quote, "There is a shortage of everything. Pharmacies in New York City struggle to keep key medications stocked amid the coronavirus outbreak." And then they go on to say, but getting inventory is just one of the challenges in filling our orders during the coronavirus crisis. Securing air cargo transport of orders from another country to our pharmacy is another, when air transport capacity has been significantly curtailed worldwide. And then once packages reach the destination country, custom officials are backlogged because, customs officials are getting sick too. So they say, we encourage customers who may need medications in the coming months to place their orders now and try to get your doctors to prescribe 90-day supplies. This is what I told you, a month or so ago, the last time I got one of these emails from this pharmacy. And finally, Pope Francis. Speaking of my rant about, the gods must be angry with Gilgamesh and now Trump, Pope Francis has said, this from CNN, has said the coronavirus pandemic is one of nature's responses to humans ignoring the current ecological crisis. He says, I don't know if these are the revenge of nature, but they are certainly nature's responses. And the Pope says, a photo appeared the other day of a parking lot in Las Vegas where the homeless had been put in quarantine and the hotels were empty. But the homeless cannot go to a hotel. This is the moment to see the poor, said Pope Francis. He also warned against the rise of populist politicians who he said are giving speeches reminiscent of Hitler in 1933. I don't know if he's speaking to Trump here or who, or Orban or whatever, but he says, I am worried by the hypocrisy of certain political personalities who speak of facing up to the crisis of the problem of hunger in the world, but who in the meantime manufacture weapons.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I wonder who he could be talking about. We'll pick up your phone calls right after this. It's 15 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. John in Evanston, Illinois. Hey, John, thanks for watching Free Speech. What's on your mind today?
Listen, I think that we ought to think of Joe Biden as a possible Harry Truman president.
Meaning what? I mean, there were upsides and downsides to Harry Truman's presidency.
I think he was one of our great presidents. I think he did the right thing. It wasn't the Truman Plan, it was the Marshall Plan. It was the United Nations. It was outlawing racial discrimination in the armed forces by executive order. The man was a good man. He was a great president, and Joe's going to be one too. Let's all get behind him.
Let's hope so. I would rather see him be an FDR kind of president, but those aspects of Harry Truman's presidency were indeed positive and do need to be emulated and repeated, and that's great. Thank you. Thank you, John. Eric in Brookings, Eric, you're listening to a commercial station. Let me put you on hold, and I'll pick you up when your commercial station's back on the air. Mike in Tacoma, Washington, listening to KBCS, one of our Pacifica affiliates. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Hey, Tom. This $500 billion part of the stimulus package, that got my blood boiling when I first heard about it. Especially when the part about there's no oversight, that Mnuchin and Trump were going to be in charge of the oversight, and I got worried about that. And then I heard that Congress was going to not do that, and now I hear that possibly Trump will be in charge of the oversight. If you look on the internet, if you look up Google, look up Putin, look up his net worth. I've heard several sources that say he's worth approximately, a speculation, that he's worth approximately $250 billion, Putin, skimmed off the ledgers of his people. And I'm worried, since Donald Trump is broke, and he's so in love with Putin and these other dictators, and he wants to be one up on him, that he's going to skim off $300 billion or some sort to make him richest man in the world.
Trump is not that
I'm
smart.
Worried about.
Trump is not that competent. This is why Trump he's scamming the Secret Service just renewed a $45,000 contract for golf carts that they're renting from the Trump hotels so that they can follow Trump around on the golf course. He's renting rooms to the Secret Service guys at $500 a night for rooms that might otherwise go for $150, $200 a night. He's having to scam our government for pennies, basically, because he's run out of runway. After his 5 or 6 bankruptcies, after he bankrupted his casinos and stuff in the mid and late 90s, he has been deeply in the hole ever since. He's been as broke as you can get, if David K. Johnston's reporting is true, and owes his soul to the banks, and nobody is loaning him money outside of Deutsche Bank. And although, Jared is now getting money, I guess, from Qatar after we threatened them. So probably, Trump has new lines of credit now. But I just don't think he's smart enough to do that, Mike. I think he's a small-time grifter.
All he has to do is write himself a check for $200 billion or something. I don't know.
It's got to go through the Treasury. It's not that simple, Mike, unfortunately. I mean, there's still some protections left here in our system. But, he may be getting backdoor money from some of these guys, the way he's manipulating the markets. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I used a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, a lot on the table here, a lot to talk about. AB in Lake Forest, Illinois. Hey, AB, what's up?
Yes. Well, we will continue to see the collapse of the whole financial system because the structure is totally corrupted with not accurate pricing model or inaccurate valuation of services and products. And it's
not to mention artificial shortages, AB, but caused by, hospitals running on a just-in-time basis and, the loss of 500,000 hospital beds out of the 1.5 million that we had when Reagan came into office. We're down to only 1 million nationwide now. And the shortage of doctors and nurses and physicians assistants caused by, the American Medical Association, in the case of doctors, limiting the supply of American doctors to keep their wages high.
Yeah, and there's a certain irony to this whole thing that something so small is going to collapse something so big. Yeah, I'm with you. And it's an issue that, when the dust settles, I mean, there's a lot of reconciliation and reckoning that's going to happen when the dust settles. And, it can't come too soon for me. AB, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you. John in Westchester, New York. Hey, John, your community is being slammed, is it not?
It is, Tom, and thanks for taking my call. I went back to work. I was out of work for a while. I went back to work at the beginning of March, I should say. And I was deemed an essential worker. I was working in the transit in New York City. And I wasn't feeling well, and I was deemed applicable for the testing, even though I wasn't any medical person. I was a regular essential worker, And within a week, I was tested, and within 4 days, I received the result of the test, which ended up being negative. So not only healthcare workers are being tested, and New York pretty much they're doing a good job.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that. You doing okay, John?
Yeah, doing okay now. Sure.
Yeah, I know some of your colleagues in the metro system in New York have fallen sick, and we have a friend whose husband is a bus driver here in Portland, and these people are scared to death. I mean, there's no way you can keep people 6 feet away from you when you're a bus driver and they're walking right by you. So it's a tough one. John, thanks for the call and thanks for the heads up on that. That's fascinating. Paul in Wells, Vermont. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. I have a thought that's been burning on me for over a week now, and that is that, for instance, you ask this question or you make this remark that, gosh, I don't know why these networks are still covering Trump on an everyday lying binge.
No, I do know why, because they want to suck up to him, and B, they want the ratings. It draws eyeballs. People can't look away from fistfights and car wrecks, and Trump supplies.
But my take is that there's it's because there's no other game in town. Essentially, there's no alternative. To so many of us, this represents a void of leadership. My point is that Joe Biden needs to step in and become the president now. He needs to put on the shoes, and he needs to get out there and get coverage every day. He has a studio in his home. I know that. And he needs to become the president, the one that people will tune into, will listen to. He should do maybe even a daily conference, or at least a press conference, or at least every other day. Just be it. He needs to be president now, because it won't take much for somebody that people have been calling Cuomo, President Cuomo. Well, he's not running for president. So I don't know why, really, frankly, both Bernie and Joe should have been doing this for at least a week or 2 weeks at this point or longer. But
I completely agree with you, Paul. And if Joe Biden's stuttering and his halting public presentation technique is causing his advisors to think that it's better not to have so much of him out there, then tell him to nominate his vice presidential candidate, to pick his vice presidential nominee today, and then put her out there tomorrow so that she is the one who's taking the questions every day and dealing with the issues. There's enough public information.
Tom. He can put a panel together and just kind of mimic what Trump is doing with a panel
Put
of
together a
experts
cabinet.
with access.
Put together a shadow cabinet.
Exactly.
Here's Julian Castro. He's going to be our HHS secretary, like he was last. I think he was last time. Maybe he was housing. Here's Elizabeth Warren, if she's not the VP. She's going to be our Secretary of the Treasury. And just put together a damn cabinet right now, Joe. Come on, do it.
Just start. Do it. Just be it. Do it and be it, and get ahead of things.
Yeah, I'm with you. Paul, if you and I ran the Democratic Party, it would be. We might actually win elections.
Honestly, I wish somebody would step in. Thank you,
well,
Tom.
It may be that right now is a little premature, and Paul, thank you for the call, because the Republicans will say, oh, they're just trying to politicize this. They're just trying to make political points and all that kind of stuff. They've already said that about Cuomo, but he's not running for president. But I would ignore the Republican complaints. They've been whining about stuff ever since Obama wore a tan suit. Screw them, all right? Let's have some leadership on the Democratic side now.
To the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had master slaves, feudalism had lords serfs, and monarchy had king subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, use a couple of examples.
Asking why Trump is fighting clean car standards instead of the coronavirus. Check it all out wherever fine podcasts are available. So Donald Trump has just deployed Patriot missiles to Iraq and pointed them at Iran. Has gone out of his way to threaten Iran, saying that they will pay a very heavy price. If any of their proxy groups, any of the Iranian-supported militias or groups, this is basically the Shiites, the majority of the population of Iraq. In Iraq, if any of them were to attack American forces, Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo will use this as an excuse to launch a war against Iran. This is insane. The New York Times is reporting military commanders, the Pentagon has ordered military commanders to plan for an escalation of American combat in Iraq, in the region, and, quote, prepare a campaign to destroy an Iranian-backed militia group that has threatened more attacks against American troops. We crippled their country with sanctions, and now we're threatening a war so that Trump can get reelected. There's a video about it over at thomhartmann.com for our supporters. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day. Richard in Santa Rosa, California. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Hey, Tom, how you doing? Good listening to you. Good talking to you. We talk every now and then. But I work as a business consultant for the SBDC, Small Business Development Center in Marin County. And I'd heard somebody talk about the PPP program. I didn't hear the entire broadcast. But I'm in the middle of it, and I can tell you what I know and what I understand. And I've been telling all my clients the exact same thing. So real quick summary is that the first misunderstanding is that the SBA is funding these loans. They are not funding those loans. It's a bank that are funding the loans. So what I've seen, kind of what I think is going to evolve, and this is what the direction it's going, is that I think it was covered in your program too. Is that portfolio lenders, your large ones, Bank of America, for example, is a good example. I'm not a big fan of big box banks, but I have to hand it to them. They handled this one pretty well. They have data on the individual, so they're working with their internal clients because they're measurables. There's things that they can look at because there's a theoretical risk in the minds of banks of advancing these funds. Because the concept is, for example, if Thom Hartmann Inc. requested a $300,000 loan with this 2-page application, there's some supporting documentation, but how well do I know what this is? How is it being underwritten? Am I acquiring an authorization through the SBA prior to funding? I wire out the funds. Now this is on my balance sheet for 2 months before I'm paid back. What are the ratifications, or how do I verify what Tom said he was going to do in order to earn these funds? If he didn't execute those things, is the refund plus the fee that's built into it from the SBA going to be impaired? That's where a lot of this delay is happening. So the Bank of America and some of the big box banks have internal clients that require their internal hurdles in order to fund are going to be the ones that I think will proceed forward. And then they're going to be transactional lenders, meaning those that only want loans. Your best bet are going to be non-bank SBA lenders because that's all they do, just SBA loans. So as soon as they have their arms around it, what they're going to do is they're going to start doing this and launching this as well. And because their entire department's built on doing SBA loans, 7A loans, primarily 7A, almost always exclusively 7A. occasionally 504, which are two different animals, they'll know it. And once that comes through and they have it figured out, you'll see there'll be more opportunity for these business owners to seek that out. I would highly advise, however, don't do blind searches online. Go to your local SBDC for help, and sometimes they're not the best because quite often there are a lot of third-party referral type businesses that will present themselves as a direct lender. Oh, that's your first question if you find yourself one of those things. Are you a direct lender? If the answer is no.
Or are you a middleman who's going to take a piece of the action in exchange for connecting you to a direct lender?
Yeah, exactly.
Or are you a scam artist? I mean, you're going to find a lot of those if you search the internet for this stuff, too.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that would
good
be my
information,
recommendation and what I know. Absolutely.
Thank you. I appreciate it. When you said you were going to talk about the PPP program, my mind immediately went to Moscow and Donald Trump. But, I get it. You're talking about the Paycheck Protection Plan or the so-called small business loans. Thank you. Great to hear from you. I appreciate it, Richard. Marilyn in Sun City, West Arizona. Hey, Marilyn, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, I wanted to talk to you about your question about people working from home and going forward, what that's going to look like as things settle down. Mm-hmm. And my husband and I were both small business owners, and I said right at the beginning, I really think, looking at the people that I personally know that are working from home, I think businesses are going to take this as an opportunity in the future to say, gee, that didn't work out too bad. It costs us less in real estate and lights and wear and tear on our buildings. And why don't everybody just as much as possible work from home? And since you're working from home and you're not using gas to get here and time and blah, 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 how about we just pay you a couple of dollars less an hour for doing that?
Oh, no. We don't want that outcome, Marilyn.
No, we don't. I absolutely.
It makes sense, what you're saying, and and that's how business people think, but let's hope that that's not the outcome. But you're right. Companies will be saving money, and individuals will be saving money. And I said this at the very beginning of this thing back in February. I was saying I think that one of the business sectors that's going to take a big hit is commercial real estate, because businesses are going to figure out, depending on the kind of business it is, of course, but businesses are going to figure out that a good number of their employees don't need to have an office. They don't need office space. All of these assumptions that go back to the 19th century are going to be revisited. And I think, some people like going to work. They like the social experience and all that kind of thing. I certainly do. I miss Sean. I miss Joyce. It's just, but on the other hand, I get to talk to them every day in my ear, and we're keeping up phone conversations with our people. But I think that I think that this is actually going to change the way that business is done. But your point about pay, that's disheartening. But Marilyn, I think you're right. Thank you for the call. Rich in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Hey, Rich, what's up? They still making chocolate there?
What's that?
I said, are they still making chocolate there?
Well, I was near one of the other plants in the town of Elizabethtown. Has a Mars plant, and the other day when I drove through it, I could smell chocolate. So somebody's making product.
Okay.
There you go. So anyhow, what I wanted to bring up, and I was just looking for a suggestion from you. It seems to me we need to somehow improve the impeachment process, because right now it depends on, to a great deal, the integrity of the Senate. And if you've got a bunch of Republicans or Democrats in the future who lack a backbone and lack integrity, we could be stuck with this guy for a long time. I truly believe he could literally shoot someone, and the Republicans say, well, the self-defense, and so on. And I'm just wondering, my thought would be to move it from a legislative endeavor to a judicial endeavor. Your thoughts, please.
I think that if you do that, you're providing oversight of the executive in the judicial branch rather than the legislative branch, and it really needs to be in the legislative branch. The whole idea Jefferson wrote a fascinating letter about this to Major Cartwright back in the, I think it was in the late 1820s, in which he talked about how his idea, and not just his, obviously, collectively the founders' idea was that power needs to be concentrated at the ground, at the lowest level possible. And he suggested that the most powerful political entity in the United States should be the individual wards, what we would today probably call counties or congressional districts or precincts. Sure. And that these wards would make the decisions for the counties, and the counties would make the decision for the states, and the states would make the decision for the federal government, and power would flow from the bottom up. And that's why when they wrote the Constitution, Article 1 requires every single member of the House of Representatives stands for re-election every 2 years, period, full stop, no matter what. And because that's the body, that's the branch that's closest to the people. And that's why that's the branch not only where all spending has to originate, not only where all taxation has to originate, but also where impeachments have to originate. They have to start in the House. And then they go to the Senate. And, I think your historical perspective is absolutely accurate. In my opinion, Andrew Johnson should have been removed from office. He was probably one of our worst presidents, although we have a new contender. And Bill Clinton, no. I mean, that was the whole Bill Clinton thing was just, Newt Gingrich feeling his oats. But Trump should have been removed from office. But I don't think that moving it out of the Senate and into the Supreme Court or into the federal court system would be the way to do it. I think we just need to have a little more political accountability, and hopefully Donald Trump, being as terrible a president as he is, has revealed these things to the American people, and maybe the next time the Senate will take it a little more seriously. Rich, thank you for the call. It's great to hear from you. It's 45 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
And we'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. And welcome back. Bradley in Northport, Michigan. Hey, Bradley, thanks for watching us on Free Speech TV. What's on your mind?
Yes, Tom, thank you for being here. My call just doesn't, I don't know if it measures up even to the brevity of the situation, but we'll give it a try. I think it's a good time to call out the Republican hypocrisy and their talking points on how insuring all Americans is just a step away from Venezuelan socialism, but handing money to Boeing and directing money to direct handouts to businesses, which I realize are necessary, that isn't a socialism. I think the Democrats really have to seize that and argue that point fiercely with these Republicans. They attach to any little thing and they go forward with it, and Democrats seem to mention it once and that's it. We have to drive that forward and end that foolishness. And I thank Bernie Sanders for bringing that out as well. And let's do it.
Yeah. Bradley, I suspect that this fall and in the coming years, once we've got a vaccine for this virus and we're on the backside of this and we're looking back at it like in 1958, we looked back on polio. I think that once that, or also in the 50s, as I recall, we started looking back on measles and mumps because we had vaccines for them. I think that as that happens, this whole argument about socialism is going to be seen for the absurd BS that it is. And I just don't think that word has the potency any longer that it used to have. In part for the reason that you're describing.
Let's force the issue sooner rather than later. We can't just allow it to happen. It has to be seen.
No, I get that,
now,
Bradley,
Tom.
but what I'm saying is that the circumstances of the day have already done that for us. I mean, you've got Mitch McConnell out there talking about, let's give away $2 trillion.
Yes, I understand.
Yeah. So I just think that, when I would be surprised. Maybe I'm being completely naive here, Bradley, and it's entirely possible. I have been in the past. But I would be surprised if the Republicans try using that any longer. I think they're going to come up with other things. I think the main one is going to be we can't afford it. It's not in the federal budget. It's inappropriate use. It's going to hurt the economy. It's going to reduce jobs, those kinds of things. But I don't think that they're going to be screaming socialism anymore, especially now that Bernie's not in the race any longer.
It may end the foolishness of that particular point, then, and I'm thrilled if that's what happens.
I think so. I think we've rounded that corner. But but if not, you're absolutely right. We need to have that and be ready to pull it out and fire it. Thanks a lot for the call, Bradley. Chaz in Lakewood, Washington. Hey, Chaz, what's up?
Nazadrovia, comrade, is another glorious day in Trumpistan, is it not?
Indeed it is.
Hey,
what's
man,
up?
Are you better off than you were 4 years ago?
Yeah, right. Great question. That was Reagan's big question in 1980, right?
Yeah, I mean, how are we not hammering this home? Like, when the Republicans come up with hashtag pathetic October surprise, we better be ready for it. We better be inured to it.
Yeah, I'm with you, Chaz. I'm absolutely with you. Thanks so much for the call. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's 49 minutes past the hour. Stick around. We have a new video up over at thomhartmann.com for people who are regular supporters of our program, and the essence of it is, I use a couple of examples. There's hundreds of them out there. In one case, Alabama is preparing to execute a man who was not guilty of the crime that he committed with a relatively high level of certainty, but still they're gonna kill this guy, an African American. And the other story out of New York State where the police officers hogtied this guy, elbows behind him, tied his legs together, and then threw him down a flight of stairs, mangled his face. He looked he was totally beaten. 12 hours later, he commits suicide in his cell. How is it possible that our prisons do this kind of stuff? Because the 13th Amendment says that slavery is still legal in the United States. You have no rights if you've been convicted of a crime. We need to amend the Constitution. Check it out at thomhartmann.com.
Data by someone like Dr. Wolf, you or me, showing exactly who is directly pocketing the Fed stimulus money.
I think what he has said is that after the first of the year, after the election, you'll be able to see where this money went. There's going to be, a 6-month lag time from the time that the monies are dispersed, and it's going to take a couple months to get the money out. And so the other question for Steve Mnuchin was, when you kicked thousands and thousands, maybe tens of thousands, I don't recall the exact number, but when you kicked thousands and thousands of people out of their homes in California, when you were running that bank in California and, using illegal robo-signing to do it, when you were referred to as the foreclosure king, how much transparency were you providing? I would love to hear somebody ask that question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Rick in St. Louis Park, Minnesota. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Hey, I was just confirming with a bus driver here in the Twin Cities, Minneapolis-St. Paul area, that they do not have people entering by the front door where the bus driver is. There's a bar. So people enter the back door of the bus, and it's all free. And the only time that they end up going in the front door is because they need a wheelchair.
Oh, interesting. Well, that's good. And they may well be doing that in Portland. Our friend whose husband is a bus driver, the last time that I think Louise spoke with her was maybe 2 weeks ago. And I don't know if their conversation got sufficiently granular to find out if that's what's going on in Portland, but just generally that the transit workers were concerned, shall we say. And, which is a legitimate concern. Thanks for that, Rick. That's good news. That's very good news. And Craig, I think you've got some good news too. Hey, Craig in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. What's up?
Well, I was wondering some information. You were talking about the corporations and the companies having the employees do stuff they normally wouldn't do. And I work in human services in a group home, and they've come in now and said that I have to take the client's temperatures 2 to 3 times a shift, and I am very uncomfortable with that. Using old mercury thermometers would.
Well, that was
Go
my
ahead.
question. You know, on Amazon for $30, you can buy an infrared thermometer or ultraviolet or whatever it is. You hold it an inch away from the forehead and push a button, and it instantly tells you the temperature. It's very accurate. You know, they use them all around the world. Why don't they spend, $30 and get you a thermometer that you don't have to stick inside people and disinfect and stuff?
Exactly. Well, like I said, because they put more money into they're interested in putting more money in starting up more group homes rather than taking care and the right equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure they're taking good paychecks too. Craig, thanks for that. I guess it's not such good news that I thought. Peter in Chicago. Hey, Peter, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Joe Biden did announce a VP pick. You were talking about this about 20 minutes ago. When he first got into the campaign, someone asked him who he would pick, and he came out and said, real quick, Stacey Abrams. The problem.
No, it was the other way around, Peter.
No,
somebody asked him if he was thinking of Stacey Abrams, and he said she would be fine. Was that?
No.
Am I misremembering this, Peter?
I'll look for the tape and I'll shoot you an email on it. But he came out and said it'll be Stacey Abrams. The problem with that is if he were to go to a panel like you suggested or a VP pick to go out and talk, all that's doing is hiding the fact that Joe doesn't have it mentally, and that's clear. Cuomo, I know you guys are wanting Cuomo to be the guy, but he's been in New York.
I don't want Cuomo to be the guy.
Well,
Cuomo is he's not just a corporate Democrat. He's a right-wing corporate Democrat. He's doing a very good job of making Trump look like a fool and an idiot. And he's doing that every day, and God bless him. And people are saying, Cuomo is like the president of the United States. Yeah. But, I asked that question on Twitter. Do you want, the Democratic Party to nominate Cuomo? I'm not suggesting that they should. I am absolutely not. Peter, thanks for the call. Bob in Oil City, Pennsylvania. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Hi. Yes, I would like to say something. I think one of Biden's pick for vice president, if he's going to pick a woman, how about Michelle Obama?
Yeah. She would be spectacular. I'm guessing she has no interest in the job, but I think she would be spectacular. Thanks a lot for the call, Bob. Mark in Sauk City, Wisconsin. Mark, you got about 30, 40 seconds. What's up?
Yeah, I used to be a governmental auditor, and I know that every time that somebody didn't want to show you the information, you knew that something hinky was going on. That in today's environment, we can get that information immediately as far as where this money is dispersed. Steve Mnuchin is full of cattle dung if he says, we got to wait till January 1st. He just wants to hide it till after the election.
Yeah, my opinion too, and and he's not the only one saying that. Although hasn't been a definitive statement. But what we do know is that Trump just fired the Inspector General. That is the internal oversight in these agencies. So it's pretty mind-boggling. We'll continue the conversation tomorrow on Anything Goes Friday. In the meantime, reach out to your friends, particularly if they live in red states, and make sure that not only are they registered to vote, but that they have signed up to get an absentee ballot, whatever it takes. We got to get ready for this election, and we need to do it now. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. So tag you're it. Thanks so much for being with us today. Have a great afternoon. It's beautiful here in Portland. I'm looking forward to my walk this afternoon. We'll see you tomorrow. Take good care.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
back.